Hello everyone, today I will be talking about the vector-borne diseases in poultry for our course, Poultry Production by Group 4. So first up is, what is a vector disease? So vector disease are organisms that transmit pathogens and parasites to a person or animal, and this can cause serious diseases. What are the vectors that are involved in poultry? So for here, we have 5 types: rodents, flies, mosquitoes, lice or mites, and wild birds. So first up are rodents. The diseases are transmitted to hosts by direct transmission through direct contact or from droplets spread and rodent urine. Now in humans, direct contact occurs through skin-to-skin contact and sexual intercourse with an infected person. An example of diseases spread through rodents is rat bite fever. The infection occurs through a bite or a scratch wound from an infected rodent, direct contact with a dead rodent, or eating or drinking food and water that is contaminated by rat feces that carry infectious agents. Next is leptospirosis. The infection occurs when eating food or drinking water contaminated with the urine from infected rodents. Direct contact of the skin or mucous membranes, such as inside of the nose, with water or soil that is contaminated with the urine from infected rodents. Next is the hantavirus pulmonary syndrome. This disease is carried by the mouse deer, cotton rat, rice rat, and the white-footed mouse. Infection happens when breathing in gas that is contaminated with the rodent's urines or droppings, direct contact with rodents or their urine and droppings, and also bite wounds. Next up is flies. At the larval and mature stages, they are common in poultry farms, garbages, and slaughterhouses. The transmission of pathogen happens in 3 ways. The pathogens stick to the fly's body parts, to the legs and proboscis of flies. The pathogens are deposited along the vomit job onto the food because their mode of feeding is sucking the food after liquefaction in regurgitated saliva, and the pathogens are deposited in their feces after passing through the guts. The next vector disease is from avians or wild birds. One of the diseases is avian influenza. Now this is a viral disease which ranges from mild or even asymptomatic form to an acute fatal form depending on the viral type. In Malaysia, we have experienced avian influenza virus outbreaks over the past 3 decades. Avian influenza also affects poultry. This virus will produce depression, ruffled feathers, loss of an appetite, excessive thirst, stoppage of egg production, and watery diarrhea. For adult birds, they show swollen combs, wattles, and oedema around the eyes. Let's talk about the mosquito-borne diseases. It is a common vector that transmits viral diseases in poultry and humans such as the West Nile disease, avian malaria, fowlpox, and Zika virus. Hosts get infected through biting of a mosquito that feeds on the blood of infected reservoirs and carry infectious agents that causes diseases. Related to mosquitoes is the West Nile disease. Mosquitoes become infected when they feed on the blood of infected birds. The infected mosquitoes then spread West Nile virus to other people and other animals by biting them. Symptoms include the mild flu. However, this can cause brain damage and death. Next is the avian malaria. It is transmitted by mosquitoes of several genera including the Culex and the Aedes mosquitoes. Stagnant ponds may provide a breeding ground for these mosquitoes. Susceptible birds are characterized primarily by anemia, with symptoms of weakness, depression, loss of appetite, and comatose, and some may die. For fowlpox, it originated from mosquitoes that bite one of the infected flocks that already has fowlpox. After a mosquito feeds on a chicken with fowlpox, it becomes a carrier and the disease will live in its salivary glands for up to 8 weeks. Zika virus is also transmitted by mosquitoes in the genus Aedes, which is also responsible for transmitting dengue. It infects small chicks and the death of chicken embryos with brain lesions called microcephaly. Other vector-borne diseases are lice or mites. Lice are ectoparasites that spend their whole life on an animal host. Poultry lice use their chewing mouthparts to feed on dry skin cells, scalp tissues, feather parts, and blood. Lice are host-specific and only feed on a few closely related species of animal hosts. For mites, they are also found to spend their whole life on birds. Chicken mites is a blood-sucking mite that most of them time feed at night. Mites have a wide host range which includes wild birds and domestic poultry. For Newcastle disease, it can be an airborne virus or a skin-to-skin contact virus. It is expelled from the respiratory tract and excreted in the feces. The virus is terrible and highly contagious. It can spread through the direct contact, airborne transmission, and contaminated equipment. Symptoms include respiratory difficulty, nervous disorders, reduction in egg production and eggshell quality, sudden increase in death, high mortality rates, droopy wings, water diarrhea, depression, loss of appetite, and muscle spasms. Next up is wild birds-borne disease. In poultry, wild birds act as disease vectors of viral diseases. Next up is infectious bronchitis. It's an extremely contagious respiratory disease of chickens characterized by coughing, sneezing, and rales, also known as rattling. It can be spread through the air and can jump considerable distances during an active outbreak. The virus will survive for probably no more than 1 week in the house when poultry are not present. Symptoms include difficulty breathing, gasping, sneezing, and rales. Some birds may have a slight watery nasal discharge. One of the diseases is called Gumboro disease. The transmission or spread of the disease can occur by direct contact, which is bird to bird, contaminated litter or feces, caretaker, contaminated air, equipment, feed, servicemen, and possible insects and wild birds. These diseases can cause severe loss. It affects on reducing the bird's ability to develop immunity to other diseases. It's the most serious effect produced by this disease. Birds inflicted with this disease have ruffled feathers, a slight tremor at onset of the disease, strained defecation, loss of appetite, and are dehydrated. Now I will be explaining about the general life cycle of these vectors. So in humans, we are known as the dead-end vectors. This means we are the end hosts. In general, for filarial worms, they will never reach maturity and thus never reproduce. Same goes to all filarial worms. It has 5 developmental of larva stages in a vertebral host and an enterpod vector. Adult female worms produce thousands of microfilaria, whose first stage larvae are ingested by a mosquito that is taking a blood meal. Some microfilaria follow a diurnal rhythm. The next 2 stages of development occur in the insect vector. The last 2 after they are reintroduced into the vertebral host during a subsequent blood meal. Deimmunitis microfilaria takes 10 to 16 days in the vector to become a full adult in the right ventricle and pulmonary arteries of the dog. Meanwhile, the life cycle of the repens is very similar, but instead of migrating to the heart, the adult worms reside mostly in the subcutaneous tissues. Now I will be talking about the prevention measures for vector control. First up is rodents and rats. Must keep the land around the pen free from weeds, loose lumber, and debris. Better to have the high chicken pens above the grounds and keeping a pet such as a dog or cat to chase the vectors out. For flies, it is important to remove the feces immediately and clean up the area after feeding time. Install fans to promote more airflow. It makes them harder to fly. For mosquitoes, tidy the pen often. Remove any item that can store water. Change the drinking water of the chickens often, at least every 2 days, and cover the windows with wire. For mites, fleas, lice, and ticks, dust bath can avoid chicken mites. Garlic powder or crushed glove can place in their drinking water or dry feed to ward off the mites. It is a potential natural cure to avoid the mites, fleas, lice, and ticks. For vaccination, it is to prevent and control the contagious disease in chickens and quarantine the chicken that has been infected with the disease to avoid any other chicken to get infected with the same disease. So here is our conclusion. To sum it all up, the vector-borne diseases are diseases that can be infected through many different vectors and can be spread easily to birds and humans, since it can be zoonotic. The vector will carry many different kinds of pathogens which can cause diseases in the poultry production. There are many ways to prevent and treat the disease the chicken are infected. Breeders also play an important role in preventing the disease to be transmitted to chickens. The visitors should practice the biosecurity in the compound of the pens. This will allow higher rate of production and also a low rate of mortality.